But when you get down into the meat of the translation from the original, he says, a man shall davak be'ishto. Okay, what does that mean? Davak is the word that we translate cleave, and it means to stick to or to stick together something. You add some prepositions in there, and you really begin to see what Adam is trying to say, because he's saying that the way in which the two people become one flesh is that the man goes into the woman. And you're like, whoa, you don't see that in English. It just says he shall cleave to his wife. Well, it takes a bit of imagination to imagine what he means by cleave to, but in the Hebrew it's more concrete, and that's what I like about the Hebrew language. It's a very concrete language. Now, the other words that translate sound is where his initial reaction says, Zot hapa. It's like he's saying, yo, like this is off the hook. God, what did you hook up here? And the word pam is actually a word that is onomatopoeic. It sounds like what it means. So it's like he's banging his hand on something, saying, my goodness, this woman is drop dead. You can see it more concretely in the Hebrew than you can in English, and that's a lot of what gets lost in the translation. So the Bible is actually much more fun than we know it to be.
Now, when you describe that, I mean, because you describe the same way in the book, it's like that raw emotion that you get when you see, a beautiful woman.
Yeah.
And which, I mean, makes me feel better as a man, knowing that that's not some demonic in me, what I mean?
That's normal. That's completely normal.
It's like, yeah, so, but where do we separate that from lust? Now, I mean, this is the perfect man. This is before sin entered the world, and he's feeling like that when he sees a woman before she was his wife. I mean, this is just the first sight of it. Is what he experienced there lust, or is lust something different? Like, how do you?
You were asking the $64,000 question right there. It's where do we, on the continuum of admiration, appreciation, does it translate into the area of lust? And for us as human beings, it's a difficult question to answer, because for one thing, God has made us with an appreciation of what is beautiful. I'll take myself for example. I'm really heavy into cars. I love exotic cars, and when if I'm standing on a street corner and I see an exotic car pass, like I'm gone. I'm into it. And I'm thinking, okay, I can appreciate beauty. And if I can react like that to a car, or if I go to a beautiful home and I see magnificent architecture and I can appreciate that, what is so different about a woman, which is probably the most beautiful thing that God has ever created? And why can I not react in a similar fashion to the beauty of a woman as I do to the beauty of a car or a house? Well, the unfortunate fact is that you can. You can and you can't. If you react certain ways to a woman is a person and not a thing, first of all. And although you can appreciate beauty, there's a point at which you have crossed the line into lust, and Jesus talks about that too. And so it's difficult to reckon with as a human being, because here's a beautiful woman, you see her, maybe you'd like to have her, but it's hard to know what to say and what to do with regard to your reaction to seeing a beautiful woman over against something else that's beautiful. It's just one of those things that we struggle with, that we don't particularly have the answer to.
I think that's something that a lot of people, that fine line, or if there is even a fine line, but it's definitely something that you're gonna struggle with.
Especially in the modern day. I mean, today we have, whereas before women and men covered more of their bodies, now even if your body is fully covered, it can be fully covered in the kind of clothing that shows its form.
Right.
And that's true of either men or women. So the shape of a person, male or female, can be imprinted on their clothing. in the way we've designed clothing now. So you can cover beauty, but you can't hide it. And the fact is that God has created the human form in such a way that's so beautiful, as David said, I am fearfully and wonderfully made, that sometimes that comes out, no matter what you put on it. And in today's world, so much of that is stripped away and done in such an enticing way that it's difficult to fend off what your eyes maybe shouldn't see, because it's paraded before you daily in magazines and on the internet and billboards and all sorts of different media. So we're bombarded by it, and it's something that we have difficulty reckoning with.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because they were originally naked in the garden.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's the more naked you get, which, I mean, if you look at the ideal that originally was there, it should be the more you're getting back to that ideal. But I mean,
now sin is in the world, right? And our minds think more carnally
Yeah.
before purity. So if you're going to see multiple naked women, I mean, are you going to have the same response to each and every one instead of the one that you're with? You know? Mm-hmm. I also want to talk about the what you call the popular Christian debate. So like the purpose of sex. Mm-hmm. How is procreation versus pleasure? There was a quote that you had put in here by Rabbi Shmuley?
Shmuley, yes.
Which I think it explained very well.
Yeah.
Why sex is also for pleasure outside of procreation, where he speaks of the human female as the only mammal on the planet that enjoys sex, even when she's pregnant, clearly showing that there's a pleasurable side and a procreative side, and that women don't go into heat like other animals, like cats, and that they are sexually active all year round, and that there is an intimacy component, because we are the only, I guess, animals or things on earth that can have intercourse face to face and share an intimate moment, whereas most animals, when they procreate, it's a back to front sort of situation. So how do you feel about all that?
Well, as you know from reading the book, Shmuley is one of my favorite authors on this subject, and I was amazed when I first read some of what he has written, how much our minds were in sync on certain things. And so actually when I was writing this book, I had purchased some of his writings, and I had to early on stop reading his writings because I knew I wanted to write my own book, and I didn't want his thoughts influencing me to such an extent that I would begin stealing his ideas. So for the sake of protecting myself against plagiarism, I set Shmuley's writings aside so that I can write my own writings and get back to him. But the pleasurable side, as opposed to the procreative side, is the focus of your question. And I've been doing some thinking on it just this past week and looking at it from both aspects. It is unfortunate that the word recreation has been pronounced recreation, because we lose some of what it's also about when we pronounce it that way, because the word is really recreation. So the debate between procreation and recreation as far as sex is almost contrived, because it's obvious from looking at the way God has created human intimacy that it serves both functions. It can certainly create other human beings, which is a wonderful thing, because after God finished creating, he's left the act of creating other human beings to us and to the animals that he created along those lines. But as far as the recreational aspect of sex, we treat that as a bad word, and it's really not, because whether we are procreating or recreating, the fact is that sex helps in the recreational sense to draw us closer together. Recreational sex is fun. Anything that we do that is recreational, you know, we're sort of in more of a chill mode, relaxed, we're having fun, we're less wound up, and that sort of thing. And those things help us to approach the more serious aspects of life with greater vigor and vitality. So I think that procreation and recreation if you will, are two important aspects of our sexuality that we need to focus on, rather than trying to set them off against one another to say, which one is it? Is sex for procreation or is it for recreation? Mm-hmm. Well, it's both and.
Both, yeah.
And I think God intended it that way.
Here, can we skip forward a little bit because it kind of ties into each other? Speaking about Augustine,
mm-hmm.
and his role in swaying the church to believing that sex is strictly for procreation, and that he felt that the original sin was sex, and the code of restrictions that came from that, which I found it completely ridiculous. I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't believe it that sex was only put to about 60 days a year, because they had restricted so many of the other days. You can find it on page 59 if you have a copy of the book already, where it says here on Thursdays they couldn't have sex because it was in memory of the arrest of Christ. On Fridays, in the commemoration of the crucifixion of the death of Christ. On Saturdays, in honor of the Virgin Mary. On Sundays, in honor of resurrection. On Mondays, in commemoration of the dearly departed. So basically the church didn't want you to have sex at all unless it was to have a baby. And even then it was, you had specific days in a week when you could do so. Which, do you feel like Augustine's influence still has a role in the church today?
Definitely. Augustine is one of the early church fathers, and as far as especially Roman Catholic theology is concerned, he is the gold standard of what defines the church's theology. Mm-hmm. After Augustine, the really major figure that comes along next in the Augustinian line of thinking is St. Thomas Aquinas. They call him the angelic doctor in Roman Catholic culture. And these individuals help to shape the way human thought is around certain subjects theologically. And for Augustine, he comes from a lifestyle, and sometimes you see this with certain people who come from the world into the church, where you led such a reckless lifestyle in the world that when you find religion, you want to run so far away from that reckless lifestyle that you go to the other extreme. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what happened with Augustine. He led sort of a wanton lifestyle before he became Christian, that when he got into the church and he was the intelligent man that he was, and he begins writing and shaping thought and that sort of thing, that he shapes thought so profoundly that he causes other people to think completely differently from how they used to think before. Mm-hmm. And Christianity had already been blighted by Greek religious thought to begin with, and then Augustine came and just hardened that even more. So what's been handed down to us even to this day is this form of thinking where sex is taboo. It's something you don't talk about. You don't do it unless you have to. It's at best a necessary evil. And in fact, the church saw even sex for procreative purposes, it is classified as a venial sin. There are different levels of sin in Roman Catholic theology. Mortal sin is, the serious stuff like murder and suicide and child molestation, those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. A venial sin is a sin that is not as, it won't take you as far away from the saving grace of God as, say, a mortal sin will, but it's still sin nonetheless. Mm-hmm. So even for procreative purposes, sex between a husband and wife, married people, for the purpose of procreation is still a venial sin.